Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Get Into It with Gila. I'm Gila Glassberg, your host, registered dietitian, and certified intuitive eating counselor. And today I'm really excited to welcome Julie Duffy Dillon. How are you, Julie?
I'm great. Gila, it's so nice to meet you, and thank you for having me on your show. I'm
I'm
excited to
so
dive
excited.
in.
I'm really excited to have you on, especially because you're known as the PCOS expert. And as I was saying before we started recording, I feel like there's a lot of confusion around PCOS and especially how to use the intuitive eating model. So, before we go there, do you mind just introducing yourself, telling us how you got into this work?
Yeah, I would love to. Yeah, so I've been a dietitian since 1999. I consider myself a seasoned dietitian now. And besides being a dietitian, I also have training as a counselor. And I say that because for a lot of the work that I've done over this time has been studying food behavior using different kinds of lenses, including being a dietitian and trained as a therapist. But I have worked in all areas of care. I've worked in hospitals, I've worked in outpatient clinics, and also in private practice. And something that I got really interested in as I became a non-diet dietitian is intuitive eating. And it probably like you, it evolved into, well, I can't not do this. Like, I
Right.
can't do weight management. I'm not going to use a weight centric model anymore. And I was specializing in eating disorders at the time when so many people kept coming to my office who were wanting to help their relationship with food, but they had this chronic illness called polycystic ovary syndrome. And they're like, well, I can't eat whatever I want. I can't eat what I'm craving because I have this PCOS thing. And, after I heard it probably 10, 15 times, I'm like, I better figure this out because diets don't work for most people. So why would they work for PCOS?
Mhm.
Everyone deserves like recovery from an eating disorder or to recover from diet culture. Why not people with PCOS? And when I looked at our training books, I'm sure you use like the Krauss manual or that big thick nutrition book.
Yep,
And
it's right
I,
here in my office. Mhm.
I mean, we all like keep it because not only
Yeah,
was it expensive, but we spent so much time with it. But
yeah.
looking at what they say about PCOS, at least in the versions I've had, there's just like this little tiny paragraph that basically just says, help people lose weight and treat it like diabetes. And I'm like, well, I know that's not going to be helpful. So for a good 5 years or so, I just was like searching for folks to help mentor me who were willing to look outside of the weight centric model. And this was probably around 2005-esque when I was doing a lot of that type of work. And luckily I connected with some folks who were doing that work. And of course, this is like pre-Instagram and stuff like that. Like I had to like use the baby internet to figure this out.
Wow.
And it was really exciting to like see tools work. And what I found with intuitive eating and PCOS, and I know we'll get into this, is like, yes, you can do intuitive eating or any non-diet tool with PCOS, and it may just look different, and that's okay. And I think you're going to find that for anybody with like lots of different chronic illnesses, there may be some tweaks here and there, but you still can heal, and prioritizing healing is still the priority. As for me, for the clinician, like you don't have to like be rigid with your carbs and sugar. And if anything else, like it probably makes it worse. So
Hmm.
let's intuitive eating, I do find to be a really helpful tool to be sustainable and actually like health promoting too.
Yeah,
So,
that's
yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
So when did you, how many years ago was that PCOS became like your thing?
Oh, it probably slowly trickled in because I was like, no, I'm just going to specialize in eating disorders. I don't want to do any kind of like medical conditions. But around 2010, probably, I was like, I think I like having this other thing because those of us, and I have a feeling you can appreciate this, working with eating disorders, there's like it just is a certain type of work where you only can have capacity for so many people that you work with. And then with PCOS, it was just kind of this different thing. And I liked it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
and then about 5 years later, I actually was starting to, I live in a small town. So I had done so many groups and I don't know, I know I didn't help everybody with PCOS, but like it was starting to trickle down. Um, but then I was like, maybe I won't specialize in PCOS anymore. And I was about ready to take it off my website when I got a phone call from Los Angeles. They're like, hey, we're doing this reality show in your town. Do you want to film with this person who has PCOS
Wow.
and is recovering from an eating disorder? I'm like, I think this may be my only chance to be on TV. I probably should take it.
That's
So then
so crazy.
it's out. So I'm like, well,
Mm.
why not? So then after that, it became something that I really enjoyed more than, like it was fascinating for me to work with eating disorders and PCOS together. Like that became really my favorite type of topic to work on with someone. So it just hasn't gone away.
That's really interesting. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you yourself never had, like, don't have PCOS. Okay. Got
Nope,
it.
don't have PCOS. Yeah, it just evolved kind of organically into specializing in it. And of course, now I know so many people in my life who have it,
Yeah. Yeah. Of
but
course.
nobody that I'm related to. Yeah.
And did you struggle with an eating disorder?
No, I actually don't have a history of eating disorder either. Again, it's like one of those things I'm like, how did I end up here? But something that I really find interesting is behavior and
Hmm.
especially food behavior. And as I completed that master's degree in counseling, I was like, huh, why is this so interesting to me? And as I started doing my own kind of just like continued therapy, I did things with Enneagram. I don't know if you're done
Yeah,
any
of
Enneagram
course.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm an Enneagram
Are
4.
you a four? I was just gonna say, you know how many people I interview and counsel are fours? I knew you were gonna say that.
You d
You like attract the same kind, right?
Are you a 4 as well?
I'm a four.
Yes. So I think that's why this is
Work
my
with eating
theory.
disorders.
Well, like food behavior, and then also like with eating disorders, there's a lot of darkness,
Yeah.
and we feel okay and actually kind of cozy when someone's talking about things that are painful. Like we're like one of the few groups of people that are not going to run away or try to make it seem
Right.
like it's a silver lining. We can
Yeah.
hang there. And so
Yeah.
that's how I've kind of just been like, I think that's just how this has happened.
Right.
So,
Makes a lot of sense.
and I think it has prevented me from really going down the path of an eating disorder. I'm almost 50, so it's helping me as I'm going through aging to just like have this layer of protection and awareness that I think I wouldn't have had. So who knows? I mean, I wonder if I would have experienced one if I hadn't gotten into this. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I think I've
Yeah.
thought of that also. Like fours
Yeah.
are really deep and they
Hmm.
internalize everyone's feelings. Like you walk into a room and you could like just feel everyone's sadness. And it's
Yes.
like really a superpower and makes sense that you would work with somebody who has an eating disorder because there's a lot of that. But
Hmm.
also being able to hold that space and help them through it is like really powerful.
I think, yeah, the holding the space is a big part of our job. It's
Hmm.
so cool to talk to another 4 that's a dietitian. There aren't that many of us, but yeah,
Really?
I think we're all kind of together
Yeah,
in this
yeah.
realm.
For
Yeah.
sure that people who treat eating disorders and are intuitive eating trained,
Yes.
it's like a certain type of
Hmm.
person. It's funny because I was just talking to somebody recently, like a business coach type of thing, and he's like, you're really more of a therapist. I think that's why, not like you're not getting like as many calls as you thought you'd be getting because
Hmm.
people are looking at your website and they're like, when they hear dietitian, they think weight loss. And you're really a
Hmm.
therapist. I'm like, well, I'm not legally allowed to call myself a therapist, but there
Right.
is so much overlap. Like there's just you like I've heard this from people who are like really well-known eating disorder dietitians that like the talk about food is like 5, 10, 15 minutes. Like you got to have more training than just the food. So it's like
100%.
I wish
Yes.
there was a training in like eating disorders. Like you are an eating disorder dietitian slash therapist. Like that would be
Hmm.
probably better.
There are a few trainings, and there's more internship programs that are starting to offer that. But you're right. I mean, there needs to be more in how a dietitian is trained, but also like as a dietitian, we already have so many classes
Yeah.
that we have to take. Like, how are they going to fit more? I don't know. Like, I remember going my freshman year, and we were on the quarter system where I was, and every quarter, every class except one was already like planned. Like
Yeah.
and I'm like, I don't have any choices here. Like, so I don't know
Well,
how we can fit any more
actually,
training, you know?
I don't remember all my classes, but if I thought
Yeah.
about it, I could because it was so many classes. Some of them really do talk about so much of psychology and food behavior
Hmm.
and counseling. So if they would just blend the two, it would make sense.
It would make sense. Or
Yeah.
you could do a master's in counseling and just get a whole lot of it.
So you have your RD and then you got you do have your master's in
Hmm.
nutrition.
Master's in counseling.
So
Yep.
you have your RD and master's in counseling. So
Hmm.
therefore you could call yourself a therapist or a counselor.
I cannot, because in the state I live in, you have to be licensed. And so the licensing, I was like, I am not going through all of that to basically, I still wanted to be a dietitian. I didn't want to like
Right.
not be a dietitian. And I would
Yeah.
have to basically give that up for about 3 years. So
Wow.
yeah,
But legally you can call yourself a counselor so people get that. You do kind of both.
I could just say I'm trained in counseling. That's like as far as
Training.
I can go.
That makes sense. That
Yeah,
makes
in the
sense.
state of North Carolina, I'm
Right.
trained as a counselor, but
Okay, got it. Very cool.
yeah.
So when you said before about like that you were trying to figure out how to use the intuitive eating model with somebody with
Mhm,
PCOS, and you said it's similar to other conditions. So let's say like diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, could we like kind of cluster that into
mhm.
how we could kind of blend the two?
So, let me make sure I'm understanding. Like, basically, other chronic conditions that also people may pause before they do intuitive eating,
Yeah.
about their similarities. Yes, like I think there's a number of conditions that, like diabetes is one, PCOS, fatty liver disease, which ironically, people with PCOS can have all three. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I those are three that I see that are like weaponized. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh no, if you get diagnosed with these or you're close to these, then you need to buckle down, and that means you can't do intuitive eating. And for me, working with people with PCOS and noticing how calories in, calories out, restriction,
Mm-hmm.
rigidity, like it didn't matter. Like they also still were harmed by restriction and dieting. And it didn't help long term. It just kind of helped me then to like have this like umbrella of like, well, it didn't it like it everybody should be able to do this then. If we've been
Mm-hmm.
able to see with PCOS, like a condition that is basically intertwined with restriction to treat it, even though there's no research to support
Mm-hmm.
that. That if people with PCOS can find another way, then everybody can. Like I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, everybody
Yeah.
can. So
I want you to take the floor and explain that, but I'll just say, like,
yeah.
I hope I don't get in trouble for saying this, but I had sometimes, I have to keep my mouth shut. I had a client who didn't really know about intuitive eating, and she was like willing to take the plunge, and she needed some help with actually somebody who had non-alcoholic fatty liver disease.
Hmm.
So of course I was doing intuitive eating, but I did as much research as I could how to blend the two, and I like that person got so much better, and we didn't
Hmm.
restrict. And I was like, and even with like some diabetes clients, like their numbers get better, but they don't lose weight. But
Hmm. Yeah.
so just to say that as proof.
Yeah. Yeah. Like we don't have like a crystal ball to know what's
Right,
going to happen.
right.
And it's basically like for a lot of the people that I work with, like just owning up, like we don't have research on a lot of these things, especially with PCOS. There's just so little research, but you have your own research. Like, let's talk about your own diet history
Right.
and like really think about how many times you've tried.
Mm-hmm.
And for a lot of people that I work with, many people are the same age as me, they're mid to late 40s or 50s. And they look at how long they've been trying, and we actually like tally out how many times have you actually dieted, and
Mm-hmm.
it'll be 20, 30, 40
Yeah.
times. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
so where's the line? Like,
Yeah.
when is it going to be enough proof for you that diets are not going to be a good enough tool for you?
Yeah.
And like that's an individual decision. That's not something I can decide.
Right.
But we do have this other option that if you even try for 3 months, 6 months, see what happens, and then maybe you can incorporate the parts that you like. But yeah, like it's I think important to just like examine for the listener, like, have diets worked yet for you? Like,
Right.
have you tried them enough yet? Like,
Right.
everyone's gonna have their number of like,
Right.
okay, after 10 times, that's enough. I don't know, I just pulled that at number. But
Yeah.
like it's up to you. And then what if you do get to a place where like, okay, I've proven to myself that they don't work for me in all the different shapes and forms, then you and I or other intuitive eating folks are here to like, okay, let's just figure out what's going to be your next step.
Yeah. I know that's a similar line that I say to clients, like 20, 30, 40 years of your life, you've been trying to lose weight. Like, has it ever helped you? Like at a certain point, it's
Hmm.
like, oh, right, it hasn't.
Yeah, and it's like important to appreciate that it's not an easy decision
Right.
because depending on who surrounds you and what's important to you and your family, like there may be a lot that you're giving up
Yeah.
by moving away from dieting. That's why like, yeah, it has to be totally a personal decision. But from there, focusing on doing some core areas, if you do have PCOS, um, you will see like like people are like, I actually feel better. Like I have energy. And for many people with PCOS, that's their biggest complaint, is like
Right.
how tired they are all the time. Like it's
Yeah.
not just tired, but like painful fatigue.
Yeah.
And so, who knew eating enough or getting closer to it can actually help you have some energy,
Yeah. Who knew?
Who knew? Yeah.
Okay, so walk us through like the on one foot. What is
Yeah.
PCOS and how is it
Yeah.
really why do people think it's related to dieting?
So, PCOS, or polycystic ovary syndrome, is an endocrine disorder that starts in the hypothalamus part of the brain, and basically results in a set of symptoms from hormones becoming imbalanced. And because of how the hormones can become imbalanced, people can have different symptoms
Mm-hmm.
and can look differently. Unfortunately, the way that it's diagnosed is technically a diagnosis of exclusion. So they exclude all these other things. And if you have a set of symptoms, including irregular or absent periods, so if you don't have a cycle yet, or you've are done with cycling, that's obviously going to be an issue for you, but you could still have PCOS. Signs of higher androgen levels like testosterone. And then the third one is multiple immature follicles, also known as cysts, on your ovaries. And, I listed these three things, and you only need two out of the three.
Mm.
So a person could have none of these, quote, cysts on their ovaries and have polycystic ovary syndrome, which I always think is a great, like, trivial pursuit kind of like knowledge there. And because of this, like, ambiguous, there's a lot of ambiguity. And so
Yes.
if you are listening and you've been diagnosed with PCOS, but you kind of like are questioning it hasn't really sunk in, or you're like, I'm not really sure. Yeah, that's the normal, because the way it's diagnosed is kind of odd.
Yeah.
And there are researchers that are looking at labs, in particular, the anti-Müllerian hormone. Am I saying that word right? AMH levels can
Mm.
also be another way to identify if someone has PCOS. It's just not the official way to diagnose it, but people with PCOS are consistently getting higher levels of AMH in their lab work. So I think eventually it will change to that.
Mm.
And so people with PCOS, though, because of the hormonal imbalance, there's again irregular periods. There's usually painful fatigue, and what's causing this fatigue is because most people with PCOS have high insulin levels as well.
Mm.
Insulin's a hormone, and when insulin levels are very high, what is going on? There's some kind of issue going on with insulin receptors that probably is like outside of the scope of this conversation, but the body just makes more and more insulin to hopefully help bring energy into the cell in the form of glucose. And eventually, because so much insulin is made, blood sugar comes down. So that's why most people will be like, well, my blood sugar is normal, until
Mm-hmm.
it's not anymore. People will often get diabetes with PCOS, but it'll like, they may be like, why am I so tired? Why do I have all these other signs maybe of diabetes, but not have high blood sugar? And that's because people usually are making so much insulin. And from there, there's also, besides the fatigue from the high insulin, there's intense carb cravings. And that's where
Mm-hmm.
you and I probably get
Mm-hmm.
looped into PCOS a lot, because again, having high circulating insulin, it will lead your body to have lots of cravings for food, because when insulin goes up, that tells our body it's time to eat.
Mm-hmm.
And when it gets higher and higher and higher, the body's like, okay, we need to eat now,
Yeah.
or we're going to die. Like
Yeah.
every cell in the body will do that. And living in our world where we're told we have to eat less as women, and we shouldn't eat too much,
And carbs will
or
kill you.
is just so absolute, right?
Right. Yeah.
Or if you've been told that you weigh too much and you have to eat less,
Yeah.
having these cravings will just feel like torture, especially if you're
Yeah.
trying to eat less. And for a
Right.
lot of people, what ends up happening naturally, this isn't like a failure or anything, is that in response to the cravings, eating. And so for a lot of folks I know we talk to, they end up feeling really ashamed of these eating times. And so that's when a lot of like binge restrict kind of cycles happen, and eating disorders start to form. And
Right.
so, yeah, I think it's like 4 to 5 times more likely to experience an eating disorder when you have PCOS.
Wow.
And this is one of the reasons, I
Right.
think if there wasn't the push to restrict carbs and sugar or to lose weight, it would probably be not as high of an incidence. It just makes
For
it so
sure.
complicated.
So, for like many people, when they are diagnosed eventually with PCOS, based on whatever they base it on, um, the recommendation outside of a non-diet dietitian would be like, okay, lose weight and restrict your
Mhm.
carbs.
Right. Like lifestyle intervention is still the primary treatment. Every 5 years, there are these evidence-based guidelines that get released on PCOS, and there's supposed to be a 2023 one. I'm like waiting for it impatiently. But they go through, I think there's like 3,000 people that write it, and it's this like really in-depth paper. And there's a section on nutrition in the 2018 one, and they go through all the research and over again, it's like lifestyle interventions, weight management, moderating carbs and sugar intake. It's all over it. But then there's a section in like the available research on nutrition and PCOS, and it very clearly states there are 0 diets that have been shown to help improve symptoms of PCOS for most people. So then it just goes, so then just pick one, which I think is just like really unfortunate.
Yeah.
Because if there's no recommendation to actually support this really intense like intervention, why just pick one? And I know it's kind of hypothetical. I feel like as nutrition recommendations are just kind of willy-nilly, like people are like, it's no big deal. It's just moderate your food intake. But you and I know like that is a big deal. Like this is a
Right.
part of like things we do all day long. It's a part of how we take care of ourselves. It's how we connect with other people, how we take care of our families. Like this is actually a really big deal. And telling people just to go ahead and restrict these whole food groups, and they're already getting these intense cravings for them, is a really unfortunate like assumption to make it like, oh, it's okay to recommend it. So
That's
with that
sad.
all being, yeah, it's really sad. And I think the ownership is then on people with PCOS to fix it. There's almost this like assumption that if you do it well enough, you'll cure it, which is not true.
Right. I think it's similar
And
to diabetes. I think that's the
100%.
same messaging. Really sad.
100%. Yes, for sure.
It's really sad. I'm just like absorbing it because it's like, to me, it's like so obvious. I'm like, yeah, of course. Like
Same.
it's one of those things where it's like we want, as dietitians, we're so trained to think like evidence based.
Mhm.
I don't know if I had a really good teacher when it came to this specifically, like understanding research and learning how to read it and the sample size and what type of study.
Mhm.
And don't just look online and see a study that says like, research shows that 500 calories is now healthy. Like you have to see who wrote that and you have to see how many, how strong was the research. But it's so interesting because you're basically saying that the research that is extensive about PCOS is saying that there's no research to support the dieting, but like I guess you can, as
Like, so it's
opposed to
like,
like
still pick one. Like, it's like overriding something. And you and I know that's basically what all the research says for everything.
for everything. Yeah, that's what I was getting at. Like that's what it says. Like, but like it says, like moderate your carbs, right? So
Yeah.
number one, I don't want to moderate people's carbs. But number two, before I was a intuitive eating dietitian, I always hated when people would ask me, my doctor said I should moderate my carbs. That's so vague for somebody who knows nothing about nutrition. It's like, what is carbs and are all
Uh-huh.
carbs created equal? And so should I just not eat carbs ever? And then like
Mm-hmm.
I'm binging on carbs and now I'm really out of control with carbs and wow, I must be addicted to carbs. And it's like, hello.
Yeah, it's really ridiculous.
Yeah.
A little self-disclosure here. I think this was maybe 2 years ago. I was feeling really like run down and tired, lots of migraine, and went to the doctor. And I needed a new like internal medicine doctor, and someone recommended one, so I went to this person and got lab work done. The nurse called me to let me know about the results of the lab work, and my thyroid was I don't remember which way. Like I was maybe looking towards hypothyroid, and then also my blood sugar was high. And the nurse said from these like lab work, she's like, so just go on a low carb diet, and that was it. Like there was no like follow up, there was no specifics, and they didn't know what I do for a living. So I was like,
Yeah.
well, tell me what like first of all for the thyroid, I don't know, like. And she's like, yeah, no, the low carb will treat that. I'm like, can you tell me like what kind of specifics with the carbs? And she's like, oh, just low carb, just Google it. And I'm like, oh my, what? This is not okay. This was like,
That's where the
uh,
curse word would have come in.
yes, I'm like, ah.
Yeah.
I don't think I cursed with the nurse either, but I hung up and did because you and I know like what to do in those situations to reject that was just a way for them to check off a box. And
Nutrition
yeah,
education given.
yes. And it was so not okay, harmful. They didn't know anything about me to be able to recommend that. So I found someone else, thank goodness.
Oh, wow. Okay. I'm really happy that you just said that because I feel like just off the bat, I'm thinking of a few clients that are so frustrated and they're like, but how could what you're telling me is true because my doctor said like I can't eat carbs. And I'm like, I
Mhm.
don't know how to answer that. Like I love doctors and I think that they are very well trained and you
Mhm.
can't make a sweeping statement about all doctors, but it's like every person is a whole person and every
Mhm.
like you can't just
Mhm.
say to someone who's diagnosed with diabetes like, well, if you just ate less and exercise you'd be fine. Like you just can't.
Well, and that's why what I was saying earlier, like working with people with PCOS, it really helped me to appreciate how harmful dieting is because as I was going through people's like intakes and their behaviors every day, doctors were telling people to eat less and exercise more. And they were eating to amounts that I'm not even going to name or exercising to amounts I'm not name because it was just like so restrictive
Yeah.
and so hard on them. And then they would go to the doctor and still not lose enough weight. And the doctor would be like, you need to try harder.
Yeah.
Or they'd
uh,
give them recommendations that were more than they were eating, assuming that they were eating more. That happened all the time.
yeah.
And I think that's a big part of it. There's assumptions.
Yeah.
And if there's any like endocrinologist or PA or any other kind of doctor listening, thank you for listening.
Yeah.
But really either help people connect with a dietitian so they can do this work or really do your own kind of work on your own bias when it comes to people, especially people in higher weight bodies, because these assumptions are literally hurting people and putting them in the path of eating disorder for the first time. And more people are doing what doctors are saying than I think doctors believe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's basically what I found with people with PCOS is people were following doctor's orders. It wasn't causing the weight change. So they were doing it more. They were practicing an eating disorder, but doctors were like, just try harder.
Yeah, that they
Uh,
were practicing an eating disorder and the doctors were like, you go girl, like just do it more.
or like even like no, do more. I'm
Right.
like, their heart rate's in the 40s. We need to take them to the emergency room.
Oh
Oh
my God.
no, that's just because they're exercising a lot. I'm like, no, that's not the
It's really
same thing.
scary.
But doctors are really not traditionally trained in nutrition. I know this was 20 years ago, but when I was working at a big teaching hospital, I was 25 years old and I was working in pediatric nutrition. So they took me and I spent an hour with the med students and an hour on pediatric nutrition. My colleague did an hour of adult nutrition. And this medical school got like national headlines because it was like providing nutrition education, but they got 2 hours total
Wow.
in all of med school.
Yeah.
And that was like a huge deal. And so just keep that in mind. Yeah, doctors know a lot about hormones and like how the body works. But like the actual like food behavior, like we are with that all day long. And I think that's why more dietitians are doing non-diet work is because we're seeing how it's not working.
Yeah, it's not working.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of how like intuitive eating came to be. Like it just
Yeah.
they just like
Yeah.
had that realization like we are putting on people on diets, but it's actually not working.
Yeah. You had to like sit with the fact, like, maybe it's not them, it's me.
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe I'm not doing what people need to do in order to like promote health. It's not very comfortable,
Yeah, no,
you
it's not
know?
comfortable.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
everybody who I have interviewed who used to like treat weight loss or whatever, practice from a weight loss perspective. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then they found intuitive eating. They're like, on the one hand, they're like, okay, this is amazing. On the other hand, it's like cringy. Like, I can't believe for the last 20 years, I
Mhm.
helped people, quote unquote, lose weight, you know?
Yeah. 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 There was a good 3 or 4 years that I was doing that. And
Yeah.
yeah, it was real not okay
Yeah.
and very cringy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I understand. I've been there. So, and I know we don't have so much time, but
Yeah.
what have you found to be like the most effective, everyone's different, but the most effective
Yes.
treatment with PCOS, like nutrition and medical, everything?
I think the first and foremost, the first step for everybody is to make sure you're eating enough
Hmm.
and really ask yourself that, like, are you eating enough? And you may realize that no one's ever asked you that before, especially if you are in a higher weight body.
Hmm.
And the amount that you need is probably more than you think because we
Yeah.
have been trained to eat less. So,
Yeah.
3 meals, whatever snacks you need. And then from there are supplements that I recommend with PCOS. And I used to be very anti-supplement
Hmm.
until I was doing intuitive eating work with PCOS, and people were like experiencing so much hardship from these really high insulin levels.
Yeah.
And getting started on inositols and
Hmm.
omega-3s are two things that can help with insulin levels and PCOS. And I do have a blog post in case anybody's like wants more information on inositols on my
Yeah.
website that kind of goes through all of those.
Great.
And that like eating enough, the inositols and omega-3. And then there's this like concept that a lot of people that do not diet work, we often talk about is like, instead of like taking away things, so instead of taking away carbs and sugar, what can you add? And specifically with PCOS, I think you just need more protein probably than people without PCOS,
Hmm.
especially at your first meal of the day and the last time you eat during the day. How much? Well, that's very like
Yeah.
individual. But instead of like, I'm going to take away carbs and sugar at these meals, instead, what can I add? Specifically, what protein can I add to this eating time to see if that's going to help? And so much of PCOS care is experimentation to figure out
Hmm.
what works from you.
Right.
But the inositols, the eating enough, the omega-3s, and the protein, like those are 4 things that help most people. Like 99% of people with PCOS that I worked with have, those are like the core areas to really focus on. And it takes time, probably
Hmm.
about 3 to 6 months to really like do some repair work, longer if you have been restricting for longer, of
Yeah.
course, but a good 3 to 6 months for things like insulin levels to come down, for inflammation markers to come down, to be like getting better sleep and all those things.
Yeah.
So that's like the nitty gritty kind of like what I would start with folks. There's a lot of details in there, but that's like the meat of it. And that's
Yeah.
kind of a weird pun that it's the meat of it.
It's funny. When I have private clients and I also do groups, like intuitive eating groups.
Hmm.
Um, and I always find like when I get to the nutrition, like gentle nutrition component, I'm like,
Hmm.
listen, you know more about what's in like trendy than me. Like you know
Yeah.
more of like what people are saying about nutrition than me, unfortunately.
Hmm.
And I always come back to this, and I even used to say this before I knew about intuitive eating, that like I just think the basics of general balanced eating is like protein, carbs, and fat, fruits and vegetables, whole grains, as much as you can, like
Hmm.
adequacy, foods that you enjoy, not using food to cope with your emotions. Obviously, that's not the nutrition part, but like, it's not like we make
Hmm.
it so complicated and we demonize so many things that it's like, I can't possibly eat pizza for lunch. That's not healthy. And I'm like, well, what's not healthy about it? And it's
Yeah.
like,
Let's break it down.
it's
Yeah.
just not healthy. Potato
Yeah.
chips are just, everyone knows that candy's not healthy. How could you say it's healthy? I'm like, well, I'm not saying it's healthy, but like it's just so interesting that like
Yeah.
we've categorized, like
Yeah.
demonized food.
There's a really great podcast episode that fellow dietitian Christina Johnson recorded.
Hmm.
That is, it's the episode's probably like 3 years old, but still, like, it's still so good. She did an episode on her podcast, which her podcast is called Intuitive Eating for the Culture, but it's an episode that's just titled Gentle Nutrition, I believe. But she goes through all of like the macronutrients and like gentle nutrition in a way that I don't know, she's just really good at explaining that stuff. And
Okay, good
I've
to
gotten to know
know.
Christina a little bit, and she's someone who's like really does a lot of like invests a lot of time in reading research. So like she's just really good at like breaking it all down. And it's something that like anybody with an eating disorder history I feel comfortable with them listening to it. And again, it's like 9 minutes too. It's not even that
Wow,
long.
that's
So
awesome.
highly recommend that.
Yeah, because the
But
basics of nutrition don't always take so long. That's the thing.
no, it's not as like flashy,
Yeah,
it's just not that. Like when people find out we're dietitians, they're often like, "Ooh, that's so exciting." I'm like, "Really?
yeah.
It's
It's
not.
really not. Yeah,
It's really
yeah,
it's really
yeah.
we could talk amino acids and lipids and you'll find out it could be a snooze fest."
Yeah, yeah. I love that stuff. That's like I actually like a few years ago when I was already doing intuitive eating professionally, I remember thinking, you know what, like I really people are when I get to the gentle nutrition part and I give them like what I just told you,
Mhm.
I'm like, it's not enough. People want to know research. They want to know what's
Mhm.
really quote unquote best for you. So I was like, okay, I'm taking Paige Smathers nutrition course on gentle
Oh yeah.
nutrition. And it was Paige and it was another biochemist, I believe.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
And it was excellent, but I was like, no one wants to hear this. At the end of the day, it's that you need protein, carbs, and fat in variety, and fruits
Mhm.
and vegetables with variety, and whole
Mhm.
grains, and all foods can fit. Like
Right,
I wish
exactly.
people would believe me.
Yes, that PhD biochemist person is from my town. Like
Oh
or
wow.
did the PhD in where I live.
She's
It's a
brilliant.
really yeah, it's a brilliant person, but yeah, it's funny to like someone who has all that knowledge is still boiling it down to the same. And so for
Right.
the rest of us, we don't have to hold all of that in our brain. Like we can only hold so much in there and we
Right.
have busy lives and you
Right.
don't have to know all that. Like connecting with some tools that you can add to experiment with, and then holding on to like, I deserve to eat enough.
Yeah.
I deserve to recover. To
Yeah.
like, and recovery may mean eating cookies a lot more and candy in order to
Yeah.
recover. And
Yeah.
that's really important for health.
Right.
So yeah.
Right. I often say that it's like when we think of health, unfortunately, we think of nutrition and exercise only, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's so many other things that contribute to our health, whether it's like our emotional health, our spiritual health, our financial health, our sleep hygiene, right? Like there's so many things, and
Hmm.
we're just like minimizing it to those tiny, tiny, tiny things, right?
Yeah,
And it's like
exactly.
I like to use the example of like orthorexia because it's like orthorexia's definition is having an unhealthy relation, having what is it called again? I'm sorry. I know this because I always say it and I just like slipped my mind.
I don't know.
Having, oh, okay.
No, I mean I know, but I don't know the official like, you know.
Well, it's having a relation, it's an unhealthy relationship with only eating healthy food, right? So
Yes, yeah,
it's like
yeah,
an
yeah.
obsession with only eating healthy food. So like you'll interrogate the waiter or you won't go out to
Hmm.
eat. You're maybe eating enough calorically, but you're
Yes.
so mentally drained and mentally like afraid and scared. It's like, how could you say that's healthy? But people will still say that person's so healthy. It's like
Right.
such
Yeah.
a misconception.
Such a misconception. And it's so easy for us, like when we're every day talking to people and their behaviors and like how much it affecting their life to see that,
Yeah.
especially as fours, we're like, we can
Yeah.
feel
Yeah.
how painful this is for
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
This is not healthy.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of eating disorders and then also like how our culture is now is to really normalize
Hmm.
how like doing these painful things is good for us. But
Hmm.
we know it's like such a loaded thing. It's
Yeah.
like coming from so many different parts of our society that are not helpful for us. So,
Really.
yes.
I like to have clients like make a circle of their life, like their pie of life. And it's like, hey, how
Yeah.
much of your like headspace or time or energy is like taken up with food thoughts or fears or whatever body image. And it's like if it's 50% or more, it's like that's just too much. Like,
Yeah.
and I know. And like you just
Hmm.
said, like as fours, it's like you feel it. It's like I hear you. You really want to be skinny and you really want to be healthy. And you've been told for 20 years that eating carbs is gonna make you not accomplish that goal. But like it's also really ruined your life. So
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
you
You're
know,
spending all this time with me every week talking
yeah,
about this. And I have a feeling you'd like to do other things. Right.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I remember saying that to people a lot too. And so much of it is like so hard though to like just even look in the other direction
yeah,
because we are just so like consumed by what diets promise us. And I often think
yes,
about like, if I could just get you to turn your head a little
right,
bit
yeah,
over to see over
yeah,
here, and like there's
yeah,
this whole other option. And
yeah,
for some people, they don't have to give up a lot. Some people have to give up a lot to do
right,
that.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, like just know that people like you and me, we are here with you as you're making this kind of like transition away from diet culture, and like you're not alone,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's the part, especially living with PCOS, people are not really, I get the sense that there's not a lot of people who talk to other people who have PCOS because there's a lot of shame and stigma of the
Yeah.
condition. And so then they're just all alone. And when people get together that have PCOS, it like makes me cry every time because there's so much freedom in it. Like
Yeah.
they destigmatize the experience, they figure out what works, and they don't have to use like their medical providers as much because they're like, I'm
Right.
doing okay.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's I think that's a big part that I think is important too, is like to get out of like isolation
Yeah.
when you have this chronic condition when you can, so then you can yeah, actually be in community and feel better.
Yeah, support from other people is like so important.
Mhm.
When I was my last group that I ran, I had 5 women on, and they were just learning the principles of intuitive eating and supporting each other with
Mhm.
like a WhatsApp chat, um and just like like the sessions would start with us all supporting each other, myself included, and I was like moderating, but I was really trying to get them to help each other, and I just found like more than anything that I taught them, it was just the support and the space that they had, which is like I know we're
Mhm.
dietitians and we're not therapists, but it's like if only we could, it's both things have to happen to heal.
Well, yes, and something that I know to be true from reading all like the therapy research, and I do a lot of supervision for dietitians now, and um one thing that people will say as they've gone through the recovery process, like when they are surveyed, like what's the thing that helped you the most to recover, it's not some flashy
Yeah.
tool or skill or anything like that. It's the relationship with someone on their team. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, if you're a dietitian listening, because I know a lot of dietitians will listen to your podcast too,
Yeah.
um, keep that in mind. It's just you showing up as you. And
Yeah.
maybe if you have a friend who has an eating disorder, you just showing up as you
Yeah.
and helping them just to be where they are. That's like the thing that helps more than anything. Yeah.
Yeah. So I know like I have to run because I have a client, but I just have to say this one more thing that you just said. I remember listening to Brene Brown. Of
Uh-huh.
course, you know Brene Brown.
Yes.
And I can't remember the exact talk. I'll have to look for the YouTube link, but she was saying like the number one killer in her research like is loneliness.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, whoa, like we think the number one killer is obesity. And
Yeah.
she thinks the number one killer is loneliness. And like there has to be more than like the number one killer is obesity or cancer, even. It's like
Mm-hmm.
we're not
Mm-hmm.
looking at all the factors that affect people physically and emotionally. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like what you just said, like the thing that helped somebody heal the most was having a support person that they relied on
Mm-hmm.
and trusted. So it's like just we have to like, zoom out of the picture of like health is only about weight.
Yeah, it's not about you controlling all of these variables
Right.
and really like going bananas trying to control them all. It's really reaching out and connecting with somebody that's probably going to
Exactly.
help more. Yeah.
Okay, so this was awesome. I hope
Yeah.
that you'll come on again.
Anytime. And thanks for squeezing me in.
Yeah,
The
sure.
listeners don't know, but I was late.
It's okay. It's all good. It all worked out. It was meant to be.
Meant to be.
Yeah, meant to be. Could you tell the listeners where they could find you if you're taking new clients or supervision or anything?
Yeah, you can go to julieduffydillon.com. And since you're listening to a podcast, I have a podcast too. It's called Find Your Food Voice.
Okay, awesome. And I'll link all that in the show notes and
Thank
have a great day.
you.
Thank you for coming
Thank
on.
you.
Bye.
Bye bye.